So everyone seems to love Anastasia, am I right? The 1997 film recently dropped on popular streaming service and our current Lord and Savior, Disney+. You know, the one with Baby Yoda, or whatever. In contrast to some other Don Bluth films that have not really aged favorably, like most of them, Anastasia seems to be on the polar opposite of that list, and that makes sense. It's got great music, sometimes, and look how cute the breeding pair is when they bicker until they stop bickering and fall in love. The film's own themes of finding purpose and your identity have also aged pretty well, all things considered. To be on the same page, you don't need a long-lost grandmother to find your sense of self, you just need a man. I'm kidding. It's the identity of your lineage that can sometimes help you find your sense of present, as well as living authentically. Why do you think those Ancestry.com websites are so popular these days? Stop showing up in my AdSense, please.
Get out of here. Get the hell out of here! Get out of here! Stay away from me!
With the acquisition of 20th Century Fox in the Disney library, which I low-key think was mainly to add The Simpsons to their library, please end it soon, guys. Please, it needs to end. Anastasia seems like prime princess material, but what's the problem? Well, it's more complicated than you would have thought. Politics and history, and both. We got all the ingredients here. Memorability, merch potential, animal sidekicks, already kind of a bad sequel. So what's the issue? Well, her real-life counterpart was pretty brutally murdered. You know, this might not be the best story to theme a family-friendly musical around. It's fine. No one will notice. Stockholders, what are those? But wait, you say, or I'm gonna pretend you said something. I don't know, I can't really see you. Why would anyone think this was a good idea? Well, at the time of the film being made, the fate of Anastasia had not been determined, and the filmmakers were pretty confident it was gonna stay that way. Let's explore the actual history of the real-life Princess Anastasia, for those who are unaware to really get a grasp of the background of the story. Hold your horses, it's not gonna be pretty. The film was actually inspired by the story of Anna Anderson, a woman who claimed to be the real Anastasia when the fate of the real Anastasia was not known. You know, it's a mystery, like the song said. The story then inspired a 1956 musical, which was inspired by a lesser-known play that no one really ever talks about. Even though the 56 musical did relatively well and won an Oscar for its leading lady. Good job, Ingrid Bergman, you did it. Later, as it turned out, thanks to DNA testing, Anna Anderson was just a random Polish lady with mental health problems, probably using the subconscious want to have a sense of purpose to manifest itself into thinking she was royalty. Man, the 1900s were sad. So how did they lose track of this chick anyway? Where'd she go? Don't they have documentation about any of this stuff? Get ready for part 1 of the history kinda sucks part of the video. Since the end of the Russian Revolution in the early 1900s and the rise of communism, the royal family was eventually overthrown. You know, the Romanovs, Anastasia's family, the royal rulers of Russia, that's them. Lenin originally advocated that even though real Anastasia's father had been killed for being a poor ruler, his wife Alexandria and their 5 children were all safe and being well taken care of. No, that's not what happened.
And the results of those 4 questions say that you're a big fat liar.
So that was the initial cause of the speculation. People wanted to hope that within the tragedy there was a sliver of hope, and one of the 5 children survived. Anastasia was a popular one in America, Maria in Europe, more on that later. Rasputin was also not an evil, creepy monk dude. He was just an alternative medicine man with a weird beard and helped the youngest son, Alexis, with his hemophilia. The Tsarina was also into spiritualism and other weird customs that made her have faith in Rasputin's company. You know, spiritualism, like Ouija boards and stuff. Hemophilia, in case you've never heard of it, is where your blood doesn't clot properly, so he could die pretty easily. Thanks for that, Queen Victoria. In case you never heard the story of Rasputin's death, there was not really a conflict between Nicholas and Rasputin, as the movie implies, but more like Rasputin and the rest of Russia, who thought he was poisoning the royal family's mind and making them do his bidding. So a team of assassins essentially caught up to him and killed him, and they made this big story about how he had to eat poison cakes, and that didn't work. And then they shot him, and that didn't work. And then they threw him in the river, and that kind of worked, but he still tried to get out, and he had ice under his fingernails from clawing at the ice. Not a fun story.
You can say that again, pal.
According to a conflicting report from Rasputin's daughter, no cyanide-laced cakes and wine. His crazy murder was most likely exaggerated by murderer dude to inflate his own reputation. The Rasputin song probably lied to you. Makes for a better story though. Rasputin was probably used in the 97 film because he looks creepy, and all the legends surrounding his life and death make him an easy scapegoat. Why explain complex political themes in a children's film when you can just blame this guy? There have been worse adaptations, to be fair. Don't make me watch them. I'm allergic to pain. What? What is this? Just kill me now, I guess. Points for Rasputin not being demonized and blaming the unrest on the real bad guy, Lenin, and communism. Communism's bad, guys. Christopher Lloyd's casting as Rasputin was more of an inside joke to that other popular film with the other guy named Christopher played Rasputin. Not that Lloyd did a bad job, but his performance is also not particularly memorable to the point where it had to be him to be cast. But he still sounds creepy in his creepy voice.
If only I had lost the gift from the dark forces.
Rah, rah, Rasputin. But for real, did Anastasia die? Was the whole concept of this movie a lie? Well, actually, kinda. If you've never heard this part of the story before, it involves the brutal murder of a child, so please skip ahead if that might trigger you or in general is not your thing. It's not a fun story. After the fall of the monarchy, the royal family was moved from a palace to the middle of Siberia, Russia. They were told to just hang out there until the actual revolution calmed down a little bit, because Anastasia's father, Tsar Nicholas, was a nice guy, but not the best ruler. Womp womp. People of Russia tended to not like him that much and blame him for many of the economic problems that contributed to the revolution. After a point, though, Lenin realized that any surviving Romanovs might gain sympathy from the people and might cause an uprising, so he made the call to kill the family, and some servants, and Anastasia's pet dog. For kids. Man, doesn't history just suck sometimes? The family was moved to the basement of the house where they were staying at, where they were sentenced to death. Nicholas was shot in the head, but the princesses were turning out to be slightly bulletproof, as they had sewn jewels into their clothing in case they could be freed and had to start anew. After that, there was more direct fire and stabbing the children with bayonets. It's pretty messed up. So between reports and rumors from sympathetic guards that took pity on one of the princesses, some of them were still alive when they were being moved into the makeshift grave, and later a detailed report from one of the assassins about just the whole process, all fueled rumors that Anastasia or Maria might have survived. Coupled with more fuel to the fire that when the bodies of the Romanovs were finally discovered, Alexei and one of his sisters were missing. Regardless, it's unlikely Alexei did survive even if he was able to get away from the original assassins because of the aforementioned hemophilia. One of those sisters? Maybe? This is the most up-to-date information that the filmmakers had when they were planning the film, and I imagine finding the missing remains might have reignited some of the hype behind the original story. It's also important to mention that as much of a history mystery this was, I get a point for rhyming, that throughout all the media portrayals, the myth of Anastasia surviving also started to have a firm place in modern culture as well. People who were becoming fans of legends were also becoming fans of the media that the legends produced. When comparing real history to the film itself makes vague allusions to the political climate of Russia when all this was happening. Sure, Jan.
Everything's in red.
Yeah, I know!
But the setup of the actual plot is unclear, and without a lot of context, it looks like Rasputin is using dark magic to influence the population to overthrow the royal family, or something. That's not what happened. Keeping this in mind and how people have been responding to the myth in the past, people today have a genuine fondness of the film because it does the basic things other historical fiction tends to forget in their displays of gritty realness. They develop their characters and make them likable, and the movie arguably good?
Haven't you been listening? I've had enough. I don't care how much you have fashioned this girl to look like her, sound like her, or act like her. In the end, it never is her.
So that's great, isn't it?
What makes Anya likable is she's not just a princess, but her fiery personality is something we don't get to see that often in animated films. Maybe the closest thing being Jasmine.
I am not a prize to be won.
Her wit is also refreshing because her relationship with Dmitri adds more depth to their relationship than we usually get out of our brooding pair. It could be argued that these personality traits were inspired by the real Anastasia, who is also witty and clever, so the characters themselves have a little bit more chemistry than what we usually see, which helps make their relationship believable? What's that? These elements on top of some really good songs and a general theme of finding identity have made people really adore this movie and hold it in high regard, which we already talked about at the beginning. You can rewind. So let's go back to how history caught up with the legend, and how current Anastasia media uses this, except when they don't and they mess it up.
Will you kindly pay attention to your history lesson?
This film came out in 1997 to good critical acclaim and a hefty profit. But like, for real, did you know that this got an ice show? With the flying Bartok the Bat? What? I didn't know that.
Oh, sure, blame the bat. What the heck, we're easy targets.
20th Century Fox Animation was off to a good start before they screwed that up with, Tiny. It's not a good movie. You can probably skip it unless you like the visual style, or Nathan Lane as an alien, I guess.
You positively glow with maternal warmth, Akima. It's very fetching.
Anyway, 2007, we have a major update in the story so far. A team called Search, a hobbyist group of professionals, I guess fueled by solving this mystery once and for all, were actively investigating the site where the original remains were found, and they found some more bones. Great. Because the family had already been positively identified in 1993, the process of comparing DNA was a lot similar, and the remaining remains were all matched to each other. We did it! We solved the mystery! Even though the DNA itself didn't show who was interned in the separate grave, it didn't really matter because all the remains were accounted for, and Anastasia really did not survive and go on to sing some neat songs and get a snarky love interest. Since the 2 outside remains were found after the rest of the family was interned, they have not been added despite way too much evidence. Most people blame this on the strictness of the Russian Orthodox Church, but my money is on the fact that, hopefully with advancing DNA technology, we can tell which Romanov sister was found with Alexei, and white out the remaining resting places if needed to correct which sister is where. It's harder to do that after they already put them in the marble, so that's my theory anyway. Putin is also not a big fan of interning the remaining Romanovs, so I guess what are you gonna do?
Support current leader and ask no question.
Did this change how the film has been remembered and marketed? Of course it did, but it didn't. Not that Fox itself would be a marketing powerhouse like Disney. Even though these characters were received well by the public, you need to keep them in the public's eye in order to keep making money on them. As we mentioned before, when your studio collapses, this tends to be a little harder. That's the end of the video, right? Well, there's this other one thing. In 2016, an Anastasia musical based on this movie, based on the play, based on the real-life story that wasn't actually true, premiered to generally positive feedback. If you're new to this concept, even though this is still based on the 97 film and has a lot of the songs, the actual plot has changed a lot, where there's a shift in focus on Rasputin and more in line to being slightly more Jewish. Fans of the film are a little isolated on this decision, but come on, man. Come on, we can't do this in 2016. This might have not have been a great idea, you know? Did someone order an extra side of communism with your helping of historical princess media? The justification internally for having this play exist post-fairy tale ending is to teach the public more about the history, I guess.
And you get a little bit of the history along with the fantasy and this beautiful fairy tale that people have held on to for so many years.
I don't know if the real fate of Anastasia is actually mentioned offhandedly here though, which I think would be a determining factor. Another key aspect to note, unlike other adaptations which try to distance themselves from their animated material to be super serious, I see your shame, Disney, is that the essence of the play also embraces its source material and have a much more respective tone comparatively, from Easter eggs on set.
And one of them contains a great inside joke for fans of the film, the peddler's market scene that you see during Rumor in St. Petersburg. The letters at the top are in the Cyrillic alphabet, B-A-R-T-O-K. Bartok, the bat. He's in the show after all.
Honoring the anniversary of the film by doing a little tribute with the original singing lady, too. Woo! So that's the play's perspective. Does it work? If only we had another historic character that had a tragic life, and then we tried to market them for profit as a comparison. Oh wait, we do! Take it away, round trip.
There's also an interesting contrast here between how the Russian government can control the narrative about its history versus how American Indians can control the narratives about their history in popular culture. In Russia, where the government has a very tight hold on the media and the narratives that come out of that media, it can be much more politically isolating if you're promoting a version of Russian history that the government or people in charge don't like. Versus in the United States, American Indians have basically never had a position of privilege when it came to popular culture or the media, so it's much easier to get away with being casual about messing up American indigenous histories or stories, because there are almost no consequences. So, speaking of tragic historical biographies that were turned into hit animated movies, let's briefly talk Pocahontas, shall we? So, quick Pocahontas biography in a nutshell. Her real name was actually Matoaka, although she did go by the nickname Pocahontas sometimes. She visited Jamestown quite a lot as a kid at age 11 because she was the favorite daughter of Wahun Seneca, sometimes also called Chief Powhatan.
Great Father who loves us and named us well.
He was the supreme chief of the very powerful Powhatan Empire. So she was an 11-year-old kid when she visited Jamestown. At the time, their leader, John Smith, was in his frickin' 20s. So anyway, more on that later. But she had a good time visiting Jamestown and did so frequently until war broke out. There were trade disputes, and Jamestown settlers were terrible at growing food, but they didn't want to make any fair trades with the Powhatan Empire, so the Powhatan Empire was like, you guys are more trouble than you're worth, we're cutting you off, bye Felicia. Now, fast forward to when Matoaka was 14 years old, and she got married to a Powhatan guy named Kokowum. Women in this society could actually choose who they wanted to marry, which is, another difference from the Disney movie, but we'll get there. At age 16, some really big tragedies begin to happen to her. English settlers kill her husband Kokowum. She is forced to give up her child. She is most likely raped, and she is taken into captivity and held as ransom, basically to be used as a bargaining chip to try to get concessions from Wahun Seneca. So while she was spending her late teenage years in captivity in the English settlements, she converted to Christianity, willingly or not, we're not sure, and was given the name Rebecca. And at age 19, she was married to the English leader John Rolfe. And shortly after that, she was taken on a trip to England and basically used as an advertising campaign to try to raise money for the struggling Jamestown colony. And she died in London at the age of 22 and never saw her homeland in Virginia again. So that's the real story of Pocahontas, or Matoaka in real life. And it's like, you might very well ask yourself, so why in the world did Disney make a movie about her? Well, that's kind of John Smith's fault. John Smith, as mentioned earlier, was the 20-something-year-old leader of the early Jamestown settlement. And he was a known charlatan, egotist, narcissist, and just horrible person. Many years after he returned to England, after doing stuff in Virginia, he wrote a lot of books about the stuff that he did. And he was known to exaggerate the details quite an insanely large amount. According to his writings, at one point while he was leader of Jamestown, he was kidnapped by people from the Powhatan Empire and was about to be killed. So historians are very confident that his most famous story, the story of Pocahontas saving his life because she had fallen in love with him, at the last second, Pocahontas saved him by, putting her body between, There are two main theories as to what actually happened. Theory 1 is that John Smith was misinterpreting what was actually an initiation ritual, which was actually meant to make him a sub-chief. The thing is, though, children could not attend this initiation ritual, and Pocahontas would have been a child at that time, so that didn't happen. Theory 2, he probably just made the whole thing up, because he was known to make stories of, native girls saving his life. He had done that more than once. But the thing is, this forbidden romance story that he cooked up, it caught on. White people love forbidden romance stories like this. People love their fan fiction, even historical fan fiction, and people do love their non-canon ships, I guess, because this Pocahontas, John Smith romance that never happened, this story kept being shared throughout the generations. So fast forward a bunch of centuries to the 1990s. So Jeffrey Katzenberg is one of the head honchos of Disney Animation, and after the success of Beauty and the Beast, he was like, we need another romance, it'll be a hit, and we might win that Best Picture finally. So Disney writers got inspired by this age-old myth of Pocahontas and John Smith getting together, and they were like, let's make that into a movie. That is Oscar material. One good thing they did, actually, was they did seek indigenous consultants for the making of the film, and they tried to learn some elements of Powhatan culture and elements of the actual story, and they tried to incorporate what they felt they could. The thing thing is, though, I can't get over this. I can't stress this enough. They took an 11-year-old girl and a 20-something-year-old horrible, evil colonizer guy, and like they aged up Matoaka into this Disney version of Pocahontas, which is nothing like the real person. They gave her long flowing hair, which most likely was not a thing, because girls Matoaka's age actually were usually bald. And this quote from Glenn Keane, one of the top animators on the production, kind of says it all. We're doing a mature love story here, and we've got to draw her as such. She has to be sexy.
Excuse me, what?
From a literary point of view, it makes a much better story. Of course, she was around 11 years old. He was 27.
So how did Native Americans, not only at the time, but also since then, reacted to this movie, basically taking a terrible, terrible, tragic story of this poor, poor girl? How did Disney turn that into a love story that never happened? As a Navajo guy, I can tell you, like, not all American Indians agree on every single thing. American Indians are very diverse. There are hundreds of Native American cultures. There are tons of different perspectives and experiences that Indigenous Americans have. Well, I want to quote two people who were Indigenous Americans who were involved with the production. So here is a quote from Shirley Costello McGowan, who is from the Mattapanai Nation. She was under the impression at first that this was going to be a historically accurate movie. She says, it's a beautiful story if it didn't carry the name Pocahontas. The real story of Matoaka is tragic and sad and just horrible, and the Disney version of the story is just, you know, it's historical fan fiction, and it has nothing to do with what actually happened. However, another guy who was involved on the production, Russell Means, who was one of the most famous Indigenous activists in the civil rights movement from the Lakota Nation, Pocahontas' dad in the movie, he is quoted as saying this: "The Eurocentric males are admitting why they came here, to kill Indians and to rob and pillage. That's never been done before."
Think how they squirm when they see how I glitter.
This is also the first time that a human face has been put on an Indian female. Russell Means was excited to be part of this production. He thought this was a great progressive step for Indigenous representation. He has said that he doesn't find anything wrong with the film at all. He thought this was a very progressive moment. Having such a blockbuster movie, having an Indigenous woman as the protagonist and being shared in a positive light, he thought this was a great idea for a movie, and he was very excited to be part of it. More recently, a Yupik activist named Charity Rupati has said this: "I am not defined by your need to be comfortable or to make you feel better about what happened to my ancestors and what continues to happen to women in my community." Charity Rupati recently wrote a piece in Indian Country Today basically saying that movies like Pocahontas basically exist to make white people feel comfortable with their past. It kind of takes the horrible, tragic tale that actually happened between this clash of cultures and turns it into something happy and like, oh, we're cool with Native Americans now. That's not what happened, though. Not only back then, centuries ago, but also today, missing and murdered Indigenous women is an epidemic tragedy. So, what do Native Americans think about the Disney Pocahontas? It depends on who you ask. Many Indigenous Americans feel honored by the fact that Pocahontas, the character, the Disney character, was a strong role model Indigenous woman as the protagonist. But there are also plenty of American Indians who feel insulted by the fact that they turned the real story, which was very tragic, and basically sugarcoated it into this fairy tale romance kind of thing that never happened, and just kind of ignores the history of genocide. And if you ask me, all I can say is historical fan fiction can be fun. I mean, Abraham Lincoln, Vampire Hunter, Alexander Hamilton rapping with the Founding Fathers, that's fun. But you gotta make sure your audience knows that it's fan fiction. The Disney Pocahontas, it's basically a 1990s fanfic of what actually happened in history. It's basically an AU. It's a fanfic set in an AU where people got along and weren't horrible. But you gotta remember, that's not the reality we actually live in. It's weird, probably not the most ethical thing. Anyway, back to Anastasia. Take it away, KP.
I really think you need to take the film and the history as two different pieces of the puzzle. There are people who are a fan of the historically accurate. If Pocahontas and Anastasia are anything to go by, the general population is able to distinguish the story of these movies with their history and be a fan of both with divisions in place. This whole video goes to show that even if history hasn't held up to a myth, people still really adore the movie because it has likable characters, versus Pocahontas, which has the opposite problem. A lukewarm reception, but still being forced in our faces. God. Thanks, Jeffrey Katzenberg. It's been 20 years, let it die! The last piece of media that features Anastasia post-DNA test is Assassin's Creed, which also not only heavily draws on the popularity of the myth, but also the 90s sound film. I see that outfit she's wearing. I see it. See what I mean? About separating the fictional narrative compared to the real one, but also still highlighting the story and the struggles of real history? It's tricky, but it's possible. The first thing to consider, which I don't think a lot of people really think about, is there any surviving family Romanovs that have any opinions about this? Would they want Anastasia to be part of the Disney Princess line if they had a say in it? Would they feel like this would be inspiring to children? Or would they feel like society is trying to overwrite history and make it magical and everything works out? Hooray. Really, I think if Disney were to really consider this, this would be the first respectful move that they could make, as well as feeling out how Russians in general would react. Would they like having a Russian princess? Or would it be, I don't know, offensive? Beyond doing that, I feel like if all consenting relatives are for it, and the movie draws attention to some real history, maybe put one of those Prince of Egypt disclaimers, which actually has a paragraph about the real history, and maybe inspires people to go learn about that too. The difference between the 97 film and any other general cheap adaptations is that the effort put forth to tell a meaningful story is much more apparent. And that translates to respectful in a roundabout way, even though some of the cash grabbing is a little chintzy. Life-size bar talk is gonna give me nightmares, yo. I feel like the film holds up in its own right to be a classic. Like I said, it's got all the pieces there. It's as catchy as hell music, so I would say go for it if it's in the best interest of any surviving relatives, and Russians in general. I just wouldn't tell Putin about it. We're trying to build up the KP nation, so make sure you subscribe and tell your friends, please. Life is hard.
Did you like the video? I thought it was a little hard to follow. Maybe they should have Anastaged a better argument. Well, I guess that's what they get for rushing into things.
That's all, folks, except it's not time for the ending gag.
Today, Rasputin, the friendly Russian.
Didn't he used to be the mad Russian?
I wish that I could bake a cake made out of rainbows and smiles, and we'd all eat it, be happy.
She doesn't even go here.
Thank you. Next, please.
Grandma, it's me, Anastasia.
Hey everyone, thanks so much for watching. If you like what you saw, please remember to leave a comment and share this with a friend or 2 or 5. Click here to subscribe, we really appreciate it. Click here to check out the main collaborator for this video. Click here to check out our video playlist for this video, where you might find similar videos that hopefully you like and enjoy. There's also a credit scroll here, where you can check out all the other awesome contributors. All their info is in the description. That's all I gotta say, KP away!